Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Console Room 2026. This is the Anti-Prime Directive panel. We're recording this on January 1st, and hopefully we'll see you all in a few weeks when this actually airs. My name is Michael Zecca. I'm going to act as recording engineer in this panel, but also be part of the discussion. You'll see me on some other panels around the convention, and I'm also pretty prominent in the virtual spaces of Discord, so please feel free to hit me up there if you have questions either about this panel or about how to do things on Discord at the convention. I'm going to go ahead and have our other panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll come back and talk about what this panel is about and get started on the discussion. So let's start with Nick.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Welcome to Console Room. I hope you guys are having a great convention. My name is Nick Seidler. I am the publisher at Zeppo Publishing, which supports Doctor Who books. And I've been a Doctor Who fan since 1983, and I'm excited about this panel with these great guests.
Jim, want to introduce yourself?
There we go. There we go. Finally found the mute button. Hi, I'm Jim Soos. I used to help run Doctor Who monthly meetup here in the Twin Cities. It was a fun time, but when the pandemic hit, our people kept stopped going, and then streaming hit, and people didn't want to go to the theaters. Instead, they can watch Doctor Who at home. So yeah, big fan. Been a big fan since I was a little kid, and I'm still here. Still here.
And
And
Kevin.
Hello there. I saw my first Doctor Who story in 1982. And in 1999, I got in with a bunch of Who fans. There's about 40 of us in the same town, and we just couldn't believe our luck. And I guess I became a fan at that time. And of course, those were the wilderness years where we thought it'd never come back. And we swapped out novels and CDs, and we were just so ecstatic in 2005 when it started up again. I'm not a publisher or an author or anything, but I probably enjoy it at least as much as you all do. And I'm very happy to be here sharing.
Great. And Kevin was the one that suggested the idea for this panel to the convention. So, with the anti prime directive, what we're talking about is like in Star Trek, the Federation has a prime directive where they're not allowed to interfere in the progress of younger cultures, which, of course, Captain Kirk blatantly violates all the time. And in Doctor Who, the Time Lords have a similar rule about non interference with younger cultures because of mistakes they have made in the past. And of course, the Doctor and several other Time Lords have a tendency to break that rule as well. And what we really want to look at today is when the Doctor interferes in the many stories we see, sometimes there are some unintended consequences or complications that we learn about later in the wake of what he's done. And so I think a good starting point for this is to go chronologically back to the first really obvious case of this in the Hartnell era in the story, The Ark. So who wants to start talking about that?
Well, for those who haven't seen it, the Ark are companions, and I believe it was a Steven Tyler story and a Dodo.
Dodo.
Dodo. They land on a ship that's traveling, and there are two cultures there. You have the human culture and you have the monoids. And at the time, the monoids are pretty much the servants of the human culture. And the doctor straightens things out or so, and then he gets into his TARDIS. And then the next thing you know, he opens the door, and it's 100 years later.
700 years later.
Oh, missed that.
Yeah,
Okay, it's
yeah,
a long while later.
yeah.
And suddenly the monoids are running the show, and the humans are the servants. And the doctor goes, now, wait a minute. This is not right. So I'll leave it to the imagination of those listening if they haven't seen the rest of it. But that's the doctor interfering, trying to make things better, and lo and behold, it ends up worse from a human perspective, of course.
Well, and one of the factors in why that happened was a plague that affected both cultures in the ship, which then gave the monoids an opportunity to seize power. And that plague was caused by a cold that Dodo was carrying when they landed the first time.
Oh,
So this is a biological complication.
One of the things that I really like about the story, The Ark, is the fact that Doctor Who, very early in its own arc, right? Like very early in the Hartnell years, starting with the first Doctor, started looking at the issue of cause and effect, and for a show to be self-aware to say that this is a time travel show, and so we're going to see what happens. That's a very early example of how the show was even looking at itself in terms of like for the first year and a half before we got to the arc, there was a lot of 2 years before we got to the arc. There were a lot of stories in which we knew that the Doctor was interacting with people, whether it was a historical adventure or whether it was a science fiction adventure. And we knew that there would be consequences to that. And the show, by presenting those episodes back to back, I think made a really good point. And then, of course, at the end of that story, both cultures have to work together so that nobody is better than the other, that the humans aren't in charge, the monoids aren't in charge. Let's make sure that everybody is treated equally and fairly, which I think is the best of Doctor Who.
And there are many historicals that the Doctor lands in where they're involved, but they don't really change the course of what happens. But I think the Visitation is a good example of where, even though history goes the way it was supposed to go, the Doctor's interference really did cause a major event. And that's the Great Fire of London, kind of very inadvertently at the end of the story.
later on in the David Tennant years, he says many times that certain things have to happen. There's
Yes.
no getting around. These things will happen. You can't change it. In a way, that starts with the Aztecs, where you have Barber trying to change um, South American history. And the Doctor talks about this man is an extreme man for any time. And if you think you can make the rest of his civilization come around to him, it's not going to happen. I love watching the Romans. It is such a hoot. It's probably one of the few stories that's told for laughs. It's quite a hoot.
No,
And
that
of
I
course, hmm?
Go ahead. Sorry, keep going.
Of course, we know that Rome is going to burn.
Yeah, yeah. But it was burned by Nero, not by the Doctor setting a fire.
Well, that's history, you know.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I was going to
I,
say,
I
not.
think,
Go ahead. Yeah.
oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that's very interesting, right, about the points that Kevin just brought up, right, the Aztecs, is they sort of started with that concept of fixed points in time in Doctor Who, and then later they play with that a little bit. So from the
Mm-hmm.
very earliest days of the show, they were going out of their way to kind of tell a story the way that worked best for them. So Doctor Who was kind of breaking its own rules very early in the series itself. I think sometimes we get fans who will say, "Oh man, it was all exactly right and they had it all figured out and they were consistent until we got to fill in the blank, a certain Doctor or a new series show or whatever." But in reality, Doctor Who is always challenging that concept of are there fixed points in time or can we change what happens? And a great Hartnell story that also investigates that is the Space Museum,
Mhm.
because that's another story in which you think it's only going to unfold one way, but then the Doctor folds in actually on his own time and experience, and they no, we can change it. Maybe if we do something different, we can change it. And so very early on in the series itself, we've been talking about a lot of Hartnell stories, appropriately so. I think there's really good opportunities for different kinds of storytelling. And it took until the new series and that concept of fixed points in time for them to kind of come up with a reason, a special reason why certain things happen and other things don't. And I think this is such a great topic to talk about.
Well, isn't it like one thing too with the Time Lords? That was they have the ability to alter time or a fixed point in time. And one of the prime examples is they wanted the Doctor to take care of the Daleks and was Genesis of
This
the
is of the
Daleks.
Daleks. That's where I was heading. Yes.
Yeah. Which would have been perfect if he would have gone back in time, killed Davros. There would have been no Daleks.
Yeah. And he's had more than one opportunity to do that because we saw Capaldi interacting with Davros as a child as well. But yeah, Genesis of the Daleks is a really interesting one in that, yeah, the Time Lords are actually asked, the CIA in particular is asking the Doctor to interfere on their behalf. And the idea of changing the direction that the Daleks' evolution goes or wiping them out entirely. And he decides to basically just slow down their evolution. But inadvertently, and Russell T Davies has confirmed this, that in his mind, this is canon. Big Finish has run with it in their canon. This is the opening shot of the Time War in the Tom Baker era in Genesis of the Daleks.
Yeah, I think the strength of Genesis of the Daleks as a story, right, is they're kind of doing something timey-wimey, right? So they send the Doctor back to the very beginning when the Mark III travel machines are first being literally turned into Daleks, right? Davros is mutating the Khaled race. And we get to the end of that story, and there's that wonderful moment where Tom Baker questions whether or not genocide, right, is appropriate for any war, right? If I destroy all the Daleks. And the dialogue that he has there where he says, many races will come together and become friends because of their fight against the Daleks. Many, and there's a lot of great questions there about whether or not he should or should not, obviously kill the Daleks outright. And he questions himself. Then he kind of seems like he's going to do it. But then a Dalek shows up. And one of the great things that I think when Terry Nation wrote that story is that the leads fall on the floor, the Doctor has to back off, and a Dalek itself, right, the hate machine itself, destroys itself because it rolls over, completes the contact, and then the Daleks set back their own, development, which there's something very strong to be written about the moral argument that's going on. Especially, and moral arguments are very important in a time travel show. Should we or shouldn't we change time? And then the fact that evil itself made the decision of whether or not it should destroy itself is a very strong storytelling element that I think is worthwhile mentioning in that show.
During the third Doctor's tenure, he's stuck on Earth. Yet every so often he gets into the TARDIS and off he goes. And he's very convinced the Time Lords are doing these things to him. And their reasons, we sort of believe we know what their reasons are. He ends up on Peladon and some of these places. But it's like, yeah, someone had to send him there because, he couldn't do it himself. And you wonder, well, what's the purpose for this? It's a little palace coup going on somewhere. Why is he having to intervene? Such is life.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
Scapegoat.
I was just going to add one more thing. One of the seminal Doctor Who stories that we get, right, is the Three Doctors. So celebrating the 10th anniversary, we bring a bunch of doctors together. We violate some of the laws of time, right? You know what I mean? Like more than one doctor can be there at once. And the Time Lords make that happen, right? So we discover that while the Time Lords say you shouldn't interfere, they're willing to interfere at a certain time. And just like you said, Jim, right? Like, the Time Lords kind of bend their own rules, right? And later in the Tom Baker era, we learn of the Celestial Intervention Agency, the CIA, that there might be this sliver group of Time Lords that realize that they have to coax the world along one way or another. And they seem to use the Doctor to do that occasionally. And I know that when Kevin came up with the idea for this panel, he really wanted to investigate how sometimes the Doctor ends up somewhere and then there's a cause and effect that happens. Like when the Doctor leaves, there's a lot of cleanup that sometimes have to happen in these situations. And I'd kind of love to know what you guys think about that. Is there things that, is the Doctor leaving people to fend for themselves at that point? Or has he gotten them over the hump or helped them get to where they need to be at that moment. So I'm kind of curious, especially you, Kevin, what you think of that.
I believe the story that sets the tone for that is a Tom Baker story called The Face of Evil, where it's, apart from the Ark, the only other story where the doctor must go back to where he was to clean up his mess. And he realizes, oh my, stuck my foot in it this time. I better straighten this out. There's people's lives and, so the premise is the doctor at some time, which we never see, he helps a crashed ship, set its computer right again so that um, the technicians and the survey team can survive. And little does he know that, I don't know how many years later, that the technicians will turn into the Tesh and the survey team and the severed team. One will be very primitive and the other will be very aesthetic. And the computer's going nuts. And incidentally, Pamela Salem was one of those computer voices. Talk about diverging topics. But anyway,
Yeah.
sure enough, he's able to straighten it out and gets Leela as part of the deal. And hopefully they're much better set to start a civilization, but he's not going to stick around to see it happen. He's out the door again, and who knows what they turned into.
Right.
Yeah. There's a great set of episodes in modern, current Doctor Who, New Who, as some people call it, that combines those concept of what happens when the Doctor's first there. And it just actually happened recently in the most recent series. And that is, we had the original David Tennant story, Midnight, in which the Doctor visits the planet Midnight, and there's the entity there. And the Doctor helps rid the small surface shuttle that they're on of the entity, and we're not exactly sure what happens. And then waiting a number of years, Russell Davis wrote a sequel to that, The Well, with Ncuti Gatwa, the 15th Doctor, in which he returns. And boy, has that planet changed from the last time they were there, right? They've literally mined most of the diamonds off the planet. It's definitely an industrial planet. It's not, sort of the vacation planet that Donna went to originally with the David Tennant Doctor, and tells a completely different story. So there's a cause and effect that we see between those sequel stories. And Doctor Who has a number of sequel stories, but I think that's one where they visit the same place that we don't see too often, separated by a large amount of time. And I think that's a great set of stories. Both of those stories I feel are excellent. Both of those explore a similar topic, but in different ways. And so I think that's definitely one of those situations where you can say, that's not how I thought this planet would end up after the Doctor's intervention. It ended up very different. So,
Well, another example is, the effects on his companions. Prime example, Clara's death, where he stops time for her. And that's, again, him altering things, that shouldn't be altered, and has a cause and effect. I mean, because she's out now, traveling the universe with
a Shilder, me, yeah.
Seidler.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. I mean, he's done this repeatedly over going, well, I'm doing this for my companion, and this is the best for them. And sometimes it's not necessarily the best.
Interestingly, the modern era several times has also taught the audience about how cause and effect plays into things through the companions. We had obviously Father's Day, where Rose saves her father from dying, and there are consequences for this on the universe. But even smaller scale things like Donna Noble causing gravity to now be known as Mavity, or Ruby Sunday making that crack about what happens if I step on a butterfly back here in the dinosaur era, and then he does, and suddenly she's reptilian.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of puts it back.
Other small things
are done well.
We have a companion of one story, I believe, called Adam,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it was a boyfriend for Rose. Rose needed a boyfriend. Okay. So they go off into what year 2000 or 200,000 or something. It's a long way in the future.
Yeah.
And he gets I don't know if it's a brain implant or his head opens up. It's kind of neat, like that. And then he phones home and does a little data dump, so he's going to know a lot of things he probably shouldn't. The doctor gets wind of that, and what does he do? He dumps Adam back in the early 2000s with a thing in his head. You
Hmm.
know, and, and that's the last we hear about this poor guy.
Hmm.
He could have died a cruel death, or he could have been taken over and vivisected, or who knows what happened to him. And it's considered okay. Well, it's what happens.
Or he could have
You
gone
know,
completely evil and, with all that knowledge,
yeah,
done
I
something.
think the doctor destroys the tape, so like
Yeah.
Adam's not able to use the information that Adam is or that Adam downloaded to the answering machine, the answer phone, as they would say in the UK. But what's interesting about that story is that that's another case where it's self-inflicted. Adam did that to himself, right? He's got the thing in his head because he wanted to pull one over. He was self-serving instead of caring about the people that he was with or the other people that were there. So I think but yeah, the consequences of you having a thing that can open up in your brain and like that has a pretty serious consequence. And the medicine in 2005 is very different than the medicine in 200,000. So, I mean, having a part of your brain that opens up, I can't imagine just germ theory, what would happen there. So,
Again, that would be a great continual plot to happen in the future of Doctor Who.
mhm.
For that to come back. Plus, I've always wanted a sequel to Waters of Mars. Again, what he did, he thought he was helping somebody, change time, and she rectified it
Yeah.
slightly by committing suicide.
Yeah. Well, she recognized that, he'd already told her what her granddaughter was going to go on to do to be one of the major forces in the expansion of the Earth Empire in the future, space exploration, all. And with her suddenly returning, she's not going to be that inspiration for her granddaughter, and all these great things are not going to happen for Earth. So she chooses to take herself out so that that part of history will continue as planned. Doctor
Silly.
basically, by saving her, has inadvertently affected thousands of years of Earth evolution in a bad way. And she's like, no, I'm not going to have this.
So, silliness that occurred. The doctor, the widow, and the wardrobe. Okay, now most of this isn't happening on Earth, so it probably doesn't matter, right? But at the end of the day, you got a plane parked in the backyard somewhere in Britain. And the guy's a long way from where he ought to be, sipping his tea. And we figure, well, the doctor just heads off and everything's hunky dory. Well, there's a lot of things there that shouldn't be.
Yeah, as a Christmas episode, I think that story makes everybody feel great, right? Like, oh my gosh, the family's reunited for Christmas. This is
Mhm.
great. But, using the example, Michael, that you gave of, you know, Millie stepping on a
Yeah.
a butterfly and how there's an instant change. How different it is if one bomber, which would have more than one person on it, so there's six people that probably lived after that, if the Lancaster landed or whatever. So like, so that's a lot of divergent timelines that changes there. So I think it feels really great in that moment, but what happens beyond that, right? So hey, how did your airplane land here? We're gonna now we're gonna have an investigation with the RAF to find out how you landed in a backyard with no landing strip. Like did you get shot down? What happened? Everybody give us your reports. Unfortunately, there's enough bureaucracy in the world that
Mhm.
just the paperwork alone would would be a problem.
See, that wasn't too much. That wouldn't be too much of a stretch for me because growing up in Northwest Indiana, there was a man who owned a jet, not a fancy flying jet for traveling, No, this was a fighter. Sitting in his on his property, and everybody knew about it. You could see it as you drive down the road, going, "Oh wait, that's a jet." So, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a big surprise seeing something like that. But probably yes for England, maybe.
Hmm.
I wanted to um, talk about another instance where a companion changed things, perhaps, but in a way that actually has affected the Doctor's whole life. I am really fond of the Capaldi era story Listen.
I'm sorry.
And I'm really fond of the Capaldi era story Listen. And at the very end of that story, we've been told all through the Moffat run that the Doctor's basically been running all his life. That the whole reason he goes out and does the adventuring and stops the monsters is because he's afraid. And he figures other people are too, and he doesn't want other people to be afraid. And the thing he's afraid of was Clara grabbing his ankle from under the bed when he was a child.
Mhm.
Right, but it never explained what was
Oh, yeah,
behind them under
yeah.
the
In Rupert's bed, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But the idea that Clara was the monster under the bed that has driven the Doctor all his life just amuses me to no end.
So to go a little sideways here, if we're going to be totally chauvinistic, then it's all about humans. And I haven't seen the battle between the water and the earth or whatever the new Silurian.
Yeah, the war between the land and the sea. I haven't seen it either.
It's on its way, I believe. We might see it by console room, possibly. But if you look at the Silurians and the Sea Devils, it had a ending that's well enough for us human beings, but from their point of view, they're really getting shafted.
Yeah.
Here they are, the original inhabitants of Earth. Okay, it's their planet. And it's like, no, you don't get it. You got to go back to sleep and we'll think about you someday. Um, the doctor says it's a terrible thing. Does he do anything about it?
That's another thing that I think goes very early into the series that I think is worth pointing out, and that is that the Doctor is a protector for life, right? So I think about the Web Planet. It's a story that other than the Doctor and the companions, there are no humanoids in that story, right? First Doctor era story. And I agree with you, Kevin, right? It's very easy. And I think because we're human beings and human beings write Doctor Who as a story, a lot of stories are human beings are the good guys. And there are some exceptions to that in Doctor Who. But I think the fact that we made, I say we, the writers of Doctor Who, the fans, kind of how we perceive that character, that the Doctor is a champion for life and for good, not just for necessarily the human viewpoint. But yes, I think, and especially Kevin in those early stories, a lot of the times we see those stories from the viewpoint of humans. Or I think about even like the the second Doctor Who serial, the Daleks, where the Thals and the
Mhm.
Daleks, right? The Thals are humanoid. They're not humans, but they're humanoid. And we tend to, you know, feel with their position because they're downtrodden, and of course they look like us humans. But then Doctor Who even flipped that on its head when we got to Galaxy 4. And so suddenly there were the Dravins and
The
and
Rills.
they looked humanoid, but they were actually the bad guys, right? So very different. And so like even Doctor Who challenged that very early as a series, which I think is great. I mean that it's pretty progressive for any show, and I mean that in terms of like educating people and making people think and being critical in their consumption of entertainment. Making sure that they challenge what they expect in a show, right? So I think knowing that the Rills were actually the good guys and that the Dravins were the bad guys as early as the Hartnell story is really a strong
So the
message.
Drobins were the good-looking women, right?
Yeah,
Right.
they were.
And they got
Yeah.
they got wiped out pretty much, didn't they? They were just they're gone, right?
hmm At the end, yeah, I
At
think
the end. So
kind of a self-destruction thing again, I believe. So
oh, okay. I was half asleep when I watched. I should see it again. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
it's a good story.
oh,
Yeah.
Well,
okay. But it's like, wow, they all died. It's like Warriors of the Deep, they all die in the end. Um, what the
Well,
heck?
I think post-war, post-World War II, Doctor Who, right? Especially in the 1960s, when
Hmm.
the families who are watching this, right? The fathers who would have been there, and some of the mothers too, would have
Hmm.
been veterans of World War II. And they knew that there were consequences to being evil or being wrong. And I think that's something that hopefully people still take from Doctor Who, that being bad or being evil or being like has consequences. Sometimes those are, in fact, deadly consequences. If you choose to be evil or not give people their freedom or you don't stand for justice or truth, then there are sometimes literal deadly consequences to people. We are in the world. We are at war in a lot of places right now, right? So like I wish that wasn't the case, but there are people who are suffering all the time. And I think we need goodness and a character like the Doctor to do the right thing, or for people to stand up and act in that morally just way so that we can make sure that people aren't hurt, right? Regardless who they are.
To continue on with that thread,
Mhm.
many people love the Christopher Eccleston season, and it was
Mhm.
only one season. And people say, well, it could not have gone on because of where he ended up, because at that time we were in the Gulf War, and we cannot have a hero proclaiming he's a coward. We ended up with the David Tennant Doctor because he could be a hero in a more traditional hero role. Okay. Um, and yes, these are our heroes. We must deal with them, and they must be very much in the time. You look at the Third Doctor and James Bond and the war going on, the Vietnam War going on, and it's easy to forget, but those were the times that people were watching those programs.
Mhm. Who, Jim, you're muted.
Chris's doctor was, I don't know, came across to me as more as PTSD.
Yeah, he was the
He
PTSD
was the
doctor.
warrior that he wasn't a coward. He was willing to do what he needed to do, but there was other avenues that he'd rather, you know,
Mhm.
after killing your entire race and
Yeah.
so on, or so he thought.
Mhm.
Well, and that was his
I,
consequence for his role in the Time War.
Yeah.
and I'll even say Eccleston plays that so well. He emotes so well. I think about the sequence when he ends up back in World War II in The Empty Child and the Doctor dances. The celebration of the Doctor as he's able to declare just this once everybody lives, having gone through the Time War, okay, and like what a wonderful moment for the character, and especially for somebody who is suffering from PTSD, just like Jim said, right, to be able to say, "Hey, I can change this for the better." What a wonderful moment in the series.
But back to dealing with how the doctor reacted and saved other races that weren't necessarily humanoids. Was it dinosaurs in space?
Dinosaurs on a spaceship.
Yep, where essentially dinosaurs were there, and that he was so angered at the one individual for killing a triceratops, and he's like, it was a living being. He didn't care if it was human or not. It was alive.
Well, this is a character that talks to cows. You got to remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
It's
Um, Getting back to our perspective on things, I wanted to bring in a couple of places where, again, where the Doctor's interference affected some things in interesting ways. One story I like to look at is Timelash, which many people don't like very much. But first of all, we have an example here where the Doctor, like in Face of Evil, where the Doctor had been here before during his third incarnation, and it has affected some of the events on Carfel. He knew the Borad before the Borad became the Borad when he was just a scientist on the planet. And the Doctor's interference then may have led to the accident that the Borad had and then caused all the events of this story. Additionally, a young H.G. Wells gets wrapped up into this plot, traveling with the Doctor and Perry in this story. And what he witnesses on Carfel influences many of the stories he would later tell, like The Time Machine, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and so on. And we've also had the Doctor influence the life of another famous author in the village of Diodati or whatever it was called, where Mary Shelley was dealing with the lone Cyberman. Boy, that couldn't have been an inspiration for Frankenstein, right?
Mhm.
So even English literature has been affected by the Doctor's interference.
Well, and I think we can also throw into that uh, him meeting the guy who wrote the Christmas Carol. I just can't think of his name
Oh,
right now.
Dickens, yeah,
Charles Dickens, and
yeah,
then of course the murder mystery writer as well. So
Agatha Christie,
yeah,
yes,
yep, you're
yes,
taking them right
yes,
out of my mouth. Yep.
Well,
So thank
yeah,
you.
and
Yeah.
Vincent Van Gogh
yeah,
Mhm.
and
yeah,
Vincent and the Doctor.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm going to stretch off to the side a little bit here. The
Sure.
doctor ends up in E-space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he's on a planet which seems to have a failure to launch. Okay. And the longer he sticks around, he figures out that these people on the ship are the same creatures that are on this planet. These people are actually marshmen. Okay. And despite that, you'd think he'd tell him you need to get along with your own people. You can work something out. Forget about launching this ship. It's all a bunch of hooey. No, he says, push the button, launch the ship. So they are no longer essentially marshmen. Now they're interplanetary travelers or something. But as they get into space and they say, okay, there's nothing here, is there? And K9 goes, there's one planet. Well, let's go there. So what do they find? It's infested with vampires. And he just launched a whole bunch of people off their home world where they belong to the planet with vampires. Okay? Now, what's that about?
I think that's very bad timing. I think that's what
It's
that is. So
Now, I know on these panels we try to mostly stick to the televised stuff because not everyone has access to the alternate media. But I do want to bring up one particular storyline from Big Finish.
hmm,
In their early days of the Eighth Doctor run, they created a two-season run with a consistent story here, where from the first story, there are consequences that culminate at the end in their 40th anniversary story, Zagreus. And that is that the Doctor saves his companion, Charlie Pollard, from dying in the crash of the R-101 airship, and she was supposed to die. And the fact that she has survived has changed history and starts to cause effects and interactions with different aliens. And eventually, something terrible is going to happen to the Time Lords and the Doctor because of this.
hmm.
And so, yeah, these stories are played out even in the alternate media quite well.
mhm.
And Paul McGann
Yeah,
plays it
that's
extremely well.
that was a pretty significant story arc for Big
Yeah,
Finish for sure.
yeah, absolutely.
And leading into that multi-doctor arc really is really kind of how they played it. I thought that
Yeah,
was well done. I think it's interesting to me when we're talking about the effect that the doctor has or what happens. It's interesting when you have something like that happen to Charlie, and then you wonder if I've saved somebody, is the world better because I've saved them? Not that it doesn't have consequences, but is it better if I save somebody versus if I let them die or perish, right? And I kind of lean towards it's better to save somebody than to have somebody perish unnecessarily if you have a chance to save them. That's not to say that there may not be consequences, right? So, and I think there's other instances in Doctor Who where you can question that same thing. And it's hard, right? Because now you go back to Davros, right? Is it better if he's there?
and
If you look at
likewise, Let's Kill Hitler.
Right, of course. Yeah.
if you look at the spin-off, the Sarah Jane Adventures, um, here's a character who's been influenced by the Doctor. And what is she doing? Up to his old bad habits. She's got a crew and a canine and a magical computer. And normally she's doing things that would be considered good for the earth. But for whatever reason, they decided to let her go and have a unit take care of this.
Mhm.
So it's crazy.
Well, think we're getting down nearer to the end. Do we have any last stories or thoughts we want to cover?
I have a thought that I'd like to share with everybody, and that is just
Or,
simply that one of my personal favorite things in Doctor Who is when we hear about adventures that the Doctor has not had the Doctor's had, but that we haven't seen on screen. So, and that's very much as we talk about this topic, right? There's a lot of times where we know the Doctor has met someone or done something, or he went and studied under Joseph Lister in Glasgow, the founder of germ theory, or that he met Leonardo da Vinci at a certain time, or uh, I love the fact that the Doctor, the character of the Doctor, would go out of their way to learn and educate themselves, or go out of their way to meet famous people, or to go to important historical events. Maybe that's ABBA playing at playing in the UK or whatever kind of fun moment that is. Because I think in a way that that's so human, right? I think if we had time machines, we would want to go and ask certain people questions or learn from them, or go and see certain historical events that we'd love to understand maybe from a better, correct perspective. And so I do think those moments would probably have some, you know, potentially both good or bad effects. But if you had a time machine, wouldn't that be what we would do? So I would like to believe that we could all be as moral and just as the Doctor if we chose to do that.
Well, I would love, Jimmy the Fish. I mean, that was always a throwaway. Let's link up our meeting. Where is Jimmy the Fish here with you? Oh, you have yet to meet him? Okay, I know where you're at. But yeah, they can do so many good things going through time and whatnot. I would love to see the Ice Warriors before a frozen Mars. They can do it with the technology now. They can do a lush, rich Mars, and maybe show us the origin of the water of Mars as well. So much. I mean, they can. Right now, I think a lot of times that it's so limited, and they can even expand more, and you do time travel more, not just on Earth, but on other locations, other planets.
A future panel, I'm going to plug myself, guys, sorry, is going to be on continuity problems. And you brought up the Waters of Mars and the Ice Warriors. There are down and out conflicts on continuity. They say one thing and then they say something totally different, and you got to live with that. You do have to ask yourself, do the fans really want to know the whole Ice Warriors story? Once you get it set in stone, you can't maneuver it that much. You can't play with it that much. You need other creatures or other stories. And yes, the Ice Warriors are interesting. Um, I don't know that I'd really want to know how they got to be that way, where they're going to end up in the future, what's going on. And the new people who watch the program are certainly going to have a learning curve. They have to scale the sides. So as much as I'd like to know the Ice Warriors, maybe I'd like to read it in a novel instead of seeing it on the screen.
All right. Well, we should probably wrap things up here. And again, I'm Michael. You're also going to see me on a panel about the Silurians and Sea Devils this weekend. And also, I'm talking about Mars landers, as well as a few other topics. Anybody else have anything they want to plug before we sign off?
I just want to plug one thing, and that is that Zeppo Publishing would love for anybody who's watching this particular show, or anybody who's a part of Console Room, if you are interested in being a part of our next book about Doctor Who, we invite you to fill out the questionnaire that you can find at zeppopublishing.com, and then go to the books tab. And if you want to be a part of our next book about Doctor Who, we encourage everybody on this panel and everybody watching this or at the convention to please participate and be a part of our next book.
I can plug the Doctor Who or the Doctor Horror, panel because again, if you know anything about Lovecraftian stories, Doctor Who and Lovecraft stories are very similar. They're dark elder gods. So we'll go into that topic. We have fun. It's usually late night on Saturday, night, and it's again a lot of fun. I mean, one year we had Richard Ashton, who was one of the guests, jump in and chime in about some of his favorite stuff. So yeah, folks, if you're able to come out, join us at the panel, and have fun.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good time at the convention.